Yeah.
Okay.
No, I think we're just waiting on our key folks.
We're just opening the waiting room, folks, so we'll have a few seconds to connect, join us, make yourself comfortable. Welcome, thanks for being here. Yep. Alrighty, so good evening, and on behalf of Concordia University's Fourth Space, welcome to the Indigenous Futures Research Centre virtual launch. We're so happy you could join us this evening. We have a number of special guests joining us and IFRC co-directors, Heather Igoliorti and Jason Lewis. So I'll quickly just mention that we are streaming this meeting live to our YouTube channel. I'll put that link in the chat in just a second and pass it right on over to you, Heather and Jason. Good evening, welcome.
Good evening, everyone. Jason, you gonna say hi? No sound. I guess that it will be my pleasure to first say hello and greet you all, welcome you here to the virtual launch of the Indigenous Futures Research Centre. We're going to open with Skawanati, who has graciously agreed to join us today and get us started in a good way.
Oh, you'll have to unmute yourself. Sorry, there you go.
Sego sego guego. Kamanari ni waksanoda at nawara niwagi daroda. Kanyange haga niwago wanjoda. Gahnawagi nida wagenu dahno jojage gidaro. Aguego Oscar andere watwe nuni ne unquanigora dano deotinoradu ne ungwesua. Togazi nayodu ne unquanigora. Aguego Oscar andere watwe nuni ne unquanigora dano teotinoradu ne yunkinista a zi yuhunsade. Togazi nayodu ne unquanigora. Aguego Oscar andere watwe nuni ne unquanigora dano teotinoradu ne Ganegarunyu. To Gazi Nayodu ne unkunigora. Aguego Oscar under de watwe nuni ne unkunigora, then out deo tunuradu ne gansutsua, the fishes. To Gazi Nayodu ne unkunigora. Aguego Oscar under de watwe nuni ne unque ne unqua nigura, then out deo tunuradu ne ohande sua, then out odora sua. The grasses and roots, les végétaux et les racines. Togazi nayodu ne unkonigora. Aguego Oscar under de watwenuni ne unkonigora, deno deo tinuado ne onunguasua, the medicine, la medicine. Togazi nayodu ne unkonigora. Aguego Oscar under de watwenuni ne unkonigora, deno deo tinuado ne gahisua, the fruits. Togazi nayodu ne unkonigora. Aguego Oscar under de watwenuni ne unquanigora, dano deotinoradu ne jonequa. Our sustenance, notre nourriture. Togadi neodu ne unquanigora. Aguego Oscar under de watwenuni ne unquanigora, dano deotinoradu ne jonequa. Odinuma sua. Togadi neodu ne unquanigora. The insects, the bugs. Aguego Oscar under de watwenuni ne unquanigora deno deotinoradu ne oguire sua, the trees. Togazi nayodu ne umponigora. Agwego uska andere wat winuni ne umponigora deno deo tunoradu ne gondirio. The wild animals, les animaux sauvages. Togazi nayodu ne umponigora. Agwego uska andere wat winuni ne umponigora deno deo tunoradu ne oguire sua. The trees. I already said that. Ozito ogua. Sorry. The birds. Les oiseaux. Togazi nayodu ne umponigora. Agwego uska andere wat winuni ne umponigora dano de tinoradu ne gaeri nigarorage. Sometimes it's still difficult for me. I'm still learning the language. It's the four winds. Les quatre vents. Togazi nayodu ne umponigora. Agwego uska andere wat winuni ne umponigora dano de tinoradu ne yunki dogu radiweras. Our grandfathers, the thunderers. Togazi nayodu ne umponigora. Agwego uska andere wat winuni ne umponigora dano de tinoradu ne sungwatiza onjekar naraka garakwa. Togazi nayodu ne umponigora. That's our elder brother, the sun. Notre frère aîné, le soleil. Togazi nayodu ne umponigora. Agwego uska andere wat winuni ne umponigora dano de tinoradu ne yunki sota asatoneka garakwa. Our grandmother, the moon. La lune. Togazi nayodu ne umponigora. Agwego uska andere wat winuni ne umponigora dano de tinoradu ne Yozitsa Guarunyu, the stars, les étoiles. Togazi nayodu ne umponigora. We bring our minds together as one as we greet and thank the Creator. Sungwayat dizu. Togazi nayodu ne umponigora. Now we come to the place where we end our words. If there's anything I forgot or said twice, we leave it up to each of you to make it right and think about it and thank it in your own way, in your own minds, in your own moment. Yaogoa. Watwanuaradu. Welcome to this space.
Mahalo. Sorry, we have feedback. We're sitting across from each other. Okay, there we go. So thank you very much, Kawanati, for welcoming us into this space and bringing us into a place of good minds together. So I'm turn it over to Heather.
Yeah, and I'm just so grateful to be welcoming one of the longtime champions of the Indigenous Futures Research Centre, President Graham Carr, who's here to say a few words at the opening and share the territorial acknowledgement with us. Welcome, Dr. Carr.
Thank you, Heather. Come on, Heather, Graham's fault.
I'll be formal.
So yes, I would like to begin by acknowledging that both campuses of Concordia University are located on unceded Indigenous lands, and I'm speaking from the downtown campus now. The Gayungahaga Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and the waters on which we gather or imagine ourselves gathering virtually today. Jojogay, ou Montréal, est historiquement connu comme un lieu de rassemblement pour de nombreuses Premières Nations et aujourd'hui une population autochtone diversifiée ainsi que d'autres peuples y résident. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. Now, at Concordia, we've been giving this territorial acknowledgement since 2017, mostly on special occasions such as today. And I want to try to come back to the reason why we do the acknowledgement and link it to the launch of the center today. Most universities in Canada have similar acknowledgements in response to the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action. But with land acknowledgements now de rigueur across the country, it's important, I think, to remember why we do them, why they matter. And at its core, our acknowledgement at Concordia is a recognition of the colonial history embedded in the geographical place where we are. But it's also an acknowledgement that the social and historical origins of universities lie elsewhere in a different continent, in a different place. Through their research and teaching and through their work as convening institutions, universities do indeed contribute much to human knowledge and to human understanding. But universities have also historically tended to be exclusionary places, institutions that come with their own set of values and cultivated practices. And as we now recognize more and more, and hence also need to acknowledge, many of those values and practices are freighted with both conscious and unconscious biases that have become embedded in our fabric as places of learning. For a next generation like university, a university which I believe we all agree aspires to be a great university on a global scale, it's important to recognize that diversity in all its forms is a tremendous force for good, for innovation. And that means being prepared to recognize and celebrate also that there are different forms of knowledge and different forms of expressing knowledge that will enrich our contribution to society. And this is one of the reasons why the territorial acknowledgement matters. It grounds us, literally and figuratively. It arrests us, even for a moment, by forcing us to acknowledge a truth that is much easier to gloss over and forget. And nevertheless, the acknowledgement has its limits. In preparing for today's event, as we do, as my team does with me for all public events, we had a discussion about how much of my remarks should be in English and how much should be in French. And I'm very proud of the fact that 25% of our students at Concordia are Francophone. I want all our students to have more opportunities to connect with the Francophone reality of Quebec. And that also means I hope we can be even more successful recruiting French-speaking Indigenous students in future. I'm working with French-speaking Indigenous communities. But then I listen, as you did, to Skawanati's introduction, entitled, after all, Words Before All Else, and delivered in Kanyagaha. And I realize how her words make another point about place, practice, and values, another point about acknowledging territory, which is that there are 9 Indigenous languages of Quebec, and none of those languages are part of the fabric of our culture at the university. Students at Concordia, all of us at Concordia, can get learning opportunities in many languages, but not yet in the Indigenous languages around us, which brings me back in a way to knowledge, to ways of knowing, to ways of expressing, to ways of communicating. And today, this is why I'm thrilled to be participating in the launch of the Indigenous Futures Research Centre, which was approved by Senate last spring. The center is also a response to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action. But more intrinsically, it stems from the recommendations of our own Indigenous Directions Leadership Council and the action plan that they've defined to set a pathway for change here at Concordia. Opening this research center responds directly to the plan's recommended action 6.5, but like the territorial acknowledgement, pointing this out is not just a matter of ticking a box of saying, done that, now let's move on. For a research intensive, next-gen institution like Concordia, the Indigenous Futures Research Centre is an important statement about our desire to work closely with community partners and make a meaningful impact on society. We're a university that wants to make a global impact, and Jason, Heather, other members of the center are already doing that. But making an impact also begins locally through the role that universities play as anchor institutions in the communities of which we're part, which is why it also matters that the Indigenous Futures Research Centre researchers are going to be working to expand partnerships with communities and organizations here in Quebec, as well as across Canada and internationally. So let me close by attempting to come full circle to something I said at the beginning of my remarks about universities as custodians of knowledge. In the work of decolonization, it's a major step, a tangible step, and a major symbolic step to support the launch of a center devoted not just to crossing disciplines, but to crossing cultures and to fostering Indigenous-led research and research creation. This should be, it is a proud day for all Concordians. It is a proof point that our actions go beyond truth, beyond reconciliation, to creating new knowledge, to creating new training opportunities for graduate students, and building new relationships with the communities we serve. And by doing these things, I think we're making Concordia an even more exciting university than it already is, and that we're taking a step to being next gen by focusing on Indigenous futures. So in closing, Jason and Heather, I just want to thank you personally for the enormous investments that you've made, not just in bringing this center to fruition, but for positioning Concordia as a leader in international knowledge creation and mobilization. And I look forward to your continued leadership at Concordia for many, many, many years to come. So thank you.
I think you, Jason.
Okay. So thank you, Graham, for those very kind and generous words. What we're going to do now is going to turn to Provost Dr. Ann Whitelaw.
And I'm going to remember to turn on my microphone this time, which I didn't do at my last meeting. So thank you, Jason, and thank you, Heather, for inviting me here, and thank you, Graham, for those great words. Just want to talk a little bit about the Indigenous Directions Leadership Group, which Heather and Jason were part of at the beginning, and to really talk a little bit about the importance of the Indigenous Directions Leadership Council today. And it's the work that it's done over the last years since its founding in 2016 to bring together the cross-section of Concordia's Indigenous students, faculty, and staff, and to thank them for the work that they've done, for not wasting any time making up for what we as a university should have embraced and supported generations ago. The IDLC is central, I think, to Concordia's decolonization ambitions. It provides Concordia with leadership to calibrate our relations with Indigenous peoples, to recalibrate that relationship for the benefit of all past, present, and future students, faculty, and staff. Drafted by the IDLC, the Indigenous Directions Action Plan, which I'll just remind everyone was launched in April 2019, but was relaunched earlier this year, embodies Concordia's continuous engagement with the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and includes concrete steps to fulfill our commitment to decolonization and to indigenizing the university. The action plan serves as our roadmap to a better, more informed, and safer place for our Indigenous community members to pursue and realize Indigenous excellence in all of its forms and across the diversity of Indigenous cultures. Among the many initiatives to emerge out of the action plan, the Piquisquetan Learning Series has served to better inform non-Indigenous peoples of our responsibilities and the work that we need to undertake to be more knowledgeable and respectful in our relations with Indigenous peoples and their communities. And it also outlines respectful ways and protocols for engaging with Indigenous knowledge and knowledge keepers. I also want to say how proud I am to work with Heather and Jason, who, in addition to being faculty members and members of the IDLC, also respectively serve as special advisors to me on advancing Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous spaces. They have helped me immeasurably to ensure that our university's pursuit of academic and research excellence equally translates into excellence from an Indigenous perspective, and they have been extraordinarily generous interlocutors on a vast range of subjects. So on a personal level, thank you, Jason, thank you, Heather. The launch of the Indigenous Futures Research Centre fully supports, as Graham said, action item 6.5 of Concordia's Indigenous Direction Action Plan, and I know it's going to be an extraordinary success. Je suis honorée de participer à ce lancement car le Centre travaille à faire mieux connaître et appliquer les traditions et les systèmes de connaissances autochtones afin qu'ils inspirent le type de pensée novatrice et critique auquel aspire Concordia en tant qu'université nouvelle génération. I look forward to this cross-disciplinary research center establishing itself as a unique destination where those interested in research with Indigenous communities and in advancing Indigenous scholarship and practice worldwide will come together in order to engage in dialogue on questions of importance to Indigenous peoples and the very best interests of Indigenous communities, and that their work will have a positive impact on Indigenous futures. I'm incredibly proud of the strides that we're making in bringing Concordia's Indigenous Directions Action Plan to life, and this research center is just another shining example. So thank you, Heather, thank you, Jason, and thank you to all present and past members of the Indigenous Directions Leadership Council, and to everyone who played a role in the launch of the Indigenous Futures Research Center. And thanks to everyone in attendance today.
And thank you, Ann. I can remember sitting around talking about the dream of this, 8 years ago when Jason and I were just about the only Indigenous faculty at the university. So it's incredible to see how far things have come, and we're so grateful for your support. It is my pleasure to now introduce Interim Vice President of Research and Graduate Studies, Dr. Pollard Adams. Welcome, Paula.
Merci, Heather. C'est un grand plaisir de participer à cet événement afin de célébrer le lancement du centre. I'm thrilled to be here and to be a part of today's celebration of the launch of the Indigenous Futures Research Centre, and to mark this important addition to the academic, cultural, and research landscape at Concordia. Over the last few years, we've seen the IFRC grow to become one of our 25 university recognized research units. What was once the Indigenous Futures Cluster in the Milieu Institute is now a Concordia recognized research center. And it's an Indigenous-led environment anchored by 4 Indigenous Research Chairs. It's a place that welcomes all researchers whose work is focused on Indigenous peoples and who are interested in creating and maintaining a space that will enable collaboration and connection to communities. This recognition as a university recognized research unit is significant. It also provides support, resources, and visibility. This not only speaks to the wealth and depth of knowledge of the many talented faculty members that are involved, but also to the hard work and commitment of the many who helped bring it to fruition, and especially Heather and Jason. The IFRC's support of a mix of research approaches, topics, and collaborations is so innovative. And with the center operating locally, nationally, and internationally, I'm excited to see what new research and creative opportunities will arise. Indigenous research capacity across Concordia has been growing rapidly in the last few years, and the IFRC regroups active, engaged, and well-funded scholars and artists who ground their research in Indigenous issues. From management to theater to design and the humanities, I admire so much the diverse disciplines that have come together under this dynamic research umbrella. Research funding bodies are also recognizing the needs to articulate research approaches that respect and engage Indigenous methods for knowledge recovery, dissemination, discovery, and transmission. These approaches challenge and often critique current academic research methodologies, and the IFRC is creating an environment where Indigenous approaches can be practiced, refined, and evolved. Under the leadership of the co-directors, Jason and Heather, I look forward to seeing the center continue to expand. We look forward to seeing it continue to thrive as a vibrant space where questions of importance to all people can be engaged from multiple perspectives, and faculty and students can operate within a context of advanced Indigenous thinking and creating. Congratulations on this official launch and on this event. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you very much, Paula, for those words and for all the support that the VP Research and Graduate Studies have shown to us as we've pulled together the Research Center. It's been invaluable. I'm going to turn it over to Heather to start our introductions.
Thanks, Jason. Hi, everyone. So I'm Dr. Heather Igolioti. I'm an Inuk and Newfoundlander from Nunatsiavut. I've been at Concordia since I was hired in 2012. And I teach in the Department of Art History, where I also hold the University Research Chair in Circumpolar Indigenous Arts. Like Ann said, I am a special advisor to her, the provost, on advancing Indigenous knowledges. I've got a sort of a research-based program that I'm working through in the provost's office. And my research involves Indigenous art history and curatorial practice. I think that's probably enough of an introduction to me for now. Jason, go ahead.
Okay, great. So I'm Professor Jason Lewis. I teach in design and computation arts in the Faculty of Fine Arts. I've been at Concordia since 2001, so a little while, and it's I'm very happy to be here for this day. It's amazing. It's a result of a long series of conversations with lots and lots of people, but I do want to thank two of my longest discussants in that conversation, and that's Graham and Ann, who have really supported the growth and the evolution of all the Indigenous initiatives at Concordia, and in particular the Research Center. And I really just want to express my appreciation for the support that you've always shown me and shown our efforts to bring this stuff to fruition. So I am also a University Research Chair. Mine is in computational media and the Indigenous Future Imaginary. So I look at how different Indigenous communities are using digital, computational, and network technology. I myself am Hawaiian and Samoan, but we've been doing work with the Ganawage community and with communities across Canada and also in the Pacific, looking at those sorts of questions. I'm also a special advisor. My focus for that role, working with Ann, is on Indigenous spaces, like the IFRC, but also like the First Peoples House, which we are in the process of developing, and also in sort of donor engagement, so looking for the support we need in order to build these things out. So I think I'll leave it there too, except I'm next. So I get to segue into myself. So Heather and I are going to spend a little bit of time trying to give you sort of the big picture of what the Indigenous Futures Research Center is about. Some of the things that we're going to discuss have been touched on by Graham and Ann and Paula. But we think it's important to kind of try to create a kind of a whole narrative so people can sort of understand the vision and see what it is that we're going to try to do over the next 5, 10, 15 years. So Hans, can you advance the slide? Great. So the overall vision is actually pretty straightforward. The Indigenous Futures Research Center supports research that is led by and or for Indigenous peoples and communities. So we're interested in responding to community-identified needs and dreams, and in growing the capacity of Indigenous researchers with the ability to conduct research in ways that are grounded in community knowledge, values, and culture. We welcome all researchers, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, who engage in research that prioritizes the co-generation of knowledge that is of direct use to Indigenous peoples and our communities. We consider Indigenous futures to be any work that contributes to the health and vitality of our communities as they grow. And it includes research that explores and reflects on the past, as well as research that examines our present to be part of building those futures.
Could you go to the next slide, please, Hans? Thanks. So the IFRC developed from needs articulated by Indigenous faculty and students in the Indigenous Directions Action Plan, which was published in 2019. The action plan is the result of several years of consultations that took place inside of the Concordia community and outside of the Concordia community. We involved faculty, staff, students, alumni, and community members in the development of the action plan, which was also relaunched last year. So we worked upon building a critical mass of Indigenous faculty and researchers, which has been steadily increasing since 2010, basically, at the university. The number, along with that, of course, the number of Indigenous research initiatives have also continued to grow. And so we really envision the IFRC as a place where we can bring together all of the diverse and really amazing work that's happening across the university and become a hub where our students can become more engaged in the research as well, and where we can work together and collaborate across our disciplinary and faculty and departmental boundaries. The section 6 of the action plan, and specifically 6.5, called for the university to support Indigenous-led research and to build capacity for community-based research, which Graham was talking about a little earlier as well. To do so, we established the IFRC in order to take action to foster, strengthen, and showcase the innovative research conducted by Indigenous faculty and students in partnership with Indigenous communities now and in the future. In so doing, Concordia, we think, is establishing itself as an institution that deeply values the contributions of Indigenous peoples to academia.
So just a little bit of near history about how the Indigenous Futures Research Center came about, as we've been discussing. It's driven in a large part by the action plan, and we formed. I forgot who mentioned that the cluster. So we used to be the Indigenous Futures Research Cluster, and that was as part of the Milieu Institute for Arts, Culture, and Technology. So the Milieu Institute is sort of a super research center. It contains a number of different research clusters and research centers. And I want to thank Bart Simon, who's the director of Milieu, and my fellow steering committee members and other people at the Institute who have sort of helped Heather and I incubate the research center from a research cluster into a research center. It's been really valuable to have that space and to have that support around us so that we could focus on getting this thing going.
Yeah, we started with our two distinct partnership grants. Jason, of course, before me with the Initiative for Indigenous Futures, and then later I was successful in the Inuit Futures and Arts Leadership Project. And so we both had our distinctive labs in different parts of the campus, and then Milieu made it happen for us to come together and share, to be neighbors in one space. And so in a couple of slides, we're going to talk about the sort of plan for that current space and then where we are hoping to go with it in the near future. But right now we are on the 11th floor of the EV building, and Inuit Futures and Arts Leadership takes over the sort of middle part of the floor. And what we do with that project is we are deeply engaged in the training and mentorship of Inuit from across Inuit Unanga, which is the 4 Inuit regions of the north, as well as Inuit who live anywhere in the country, to avail themselves of meaningful opportunities to get trained into leadership positions across the arts. So theater, film, performance, curatorial practice, museum studies, conservation, arts administration, anywhere that Inuit have the opportunity to take on agential positions over our arts. We want to provide them with opportunities to get in there and to learn and to grow as scholars and emerging researchers and arts practitioners.
And the Initiative for Indigenous Futures, which we started in 2014, came out of the research network that I co-direct with Skawanati, who welcomed us into the space. And the Initiative for Indigenous Futures is about creating different venues in which Indigenous communities can dream about the future. And also sort of build capacity towards making those futures. So we support artists through artist residencies and building technology, experimenting with different kinds of technologies, the Skins workshops on Aboriginal storytelling and digital media production, where we work mainly with Indigenous youth across Canada and in the Pacific, teaching them how to make things like video games or to program or do 3D modeling and animation, but within a context that is grounded in their community's stories. And the idea is to bring together these sort of two kind of sections of their lives that often are kind of kept apart or considered apart, which is sort of them as Indigenous people and practicing their culture, and them as sort of kind of fully engaged 21st century technology users. So a big part of what we do is sort of really try to bring those things together and recognize how these technologies can be used for us as cultural practices if we approach them in the right ways. So the Initiative for Indigenous Futures is actually about to wind down. We're in our last year right now, but we've had a really, really amazing time, and look forward to transitioning some of the work we do into the Indigenous Futures Research Centre, and playing around with some new research directions, which I'll talk about later.
You can really get a sense of why Jason and I work so well together, is because, and it's also where they began to start that conversation around why futures is so important to us. And it's because we are both really foregrounding in our research work the support of the next generations that are coming after us. And so right now it may appear that the Indigenous Futures Research Centre is all about research creation and about working throughout the arts, but it's really, we're hoping to take our two labs and then expand outward and to touch every aspect of the university as we go forward here. And I think that what we'll start to see with some of the new Indigenous faculty that are joining, as well as the future positions that are coming to the university, that we're going to see this grow and expand in really dynamic ways. Can you go to the next slide, please?
Okay, Hans, next, yeah. So our general goals are these. We want to foster cross-disciplinary research and community-led collaboration. And so the first part goes to what Heather was just talking about, is a real commitment to working across disciplinary boundaries, working across faculty, partially because Heather and I sort of got this going. We're heavy on fine arts researchers at the moment. It's also where a lot of the Indigenous faculty in the university are located. But we, as you'll see, we have researchers from arts and science, and also from John Molson, and we're hoping to bring in some people from engineering and computer science soon. And then community-led collaborations, meaning that a big focus of what we want to do is, or our commitment is, to be working directly with Indigenous communities. Those could be urban Indigenous communities, or reserve-based or rural Indigenous communities. So being in conversation with them to help understand what it is that they see as their priorities and where they might need the sorts of expertise and energy and resources that we can bring to the table. Most of the members in the research center are already doing that. So that community sort of engagement layer is already built into the foundation of the research center. And it's something that we very much are looking forward to continue to grow and strengthen. So we want to increase the capacity of Indigenous researchers. Indigenous researchers in the university face all kinds of challenges, which I'm not going to go into all of them right now, but part of it is that a lot of times we're not coming from contexts where there's necessarily a lot of knowledge in our networks about how to conduct research, particularly at sort of at large scales and at international scales. And so a big part of what the Research Center is doing is providing a place where we can all learn from each other about research practice, about research creation practice, about how to do good community engaged research. Also, how we can create community for our research assistants that work with us, graduate students and undergraduates, and provide a place where we can all be together and find support, exchange knowledge with each other, and also have fun together, enjoy a space at the university that is, Indigenous determined, Indigenous led. Not everybody there is going to be Indigenous. There are a number of non-Indigenous faculty at the university are doing really important and vital work with Indigenous communities, as well as non-Indigenous students. And we're very much welcoming them and are looking forward to working with them in various ways. We want to host a vibrant space where questions of importance to Indigenous peoples can be engaged from multiple perspectives. So that speaks to what I was saying earlier. One of the things that I'm slowly learning in thinking through Indigenous research methodologies, particularly from particular standpoints, so say from a Hawaiian standpoint, is the real emphasis on holistic engagements with research questions that kind of run up against the way that the university is sort of structured and the genealogy of how universities sort of come to be in the form that they are today, which is to really divide knowledge up into these disciplines. Most of the work, the communities I work with, that's not how we approach knowledge. We try to approach knowledge from all different directions at once, recognizing that one particular aspect of knowledge doesn't just exist on its own and doesn't just have consequences on its own, but everything is interlocked and interweaved together. And then finally, we want to facilitate a learning environment where faculty and students can operate within a context of advanced Indigenous thinking and creation. And this is really important at the university, and part of it comes out of sort of conversations we've had at the university, but also we've had at other universities. So Concordia, it's not just Concordia by any means, where there has oftentimes been some frustration expressed by Indigenous students and faculty that so much of their time is spent kind of doing remedial Indigenous 101 for their faculty peers, for administration, for their student peers, that it can be difficult to find those places to really advance your own knowledge, right? Which is, presumably is far beyond Indigenous 101. And so part of what we're trying to do is create an environment where people can walk in and they can just assume sort of kind of some shared sets of knowledges that allows us to really push forward on what it is that we want to know in relationship to our own research and to the research that the communities that we work with are interested in. Go ahead, Heather.
All right, let's talk a little bit about membership. So this is everything's on Zoom right now, but we are looking forward to having all of these beautiful faces in a room together in the very near future. But our membership continues to grow. We're excited to be building upon it, from the launch on outward. Anchored by 4 Indigenous Research Chairs, so myself and Jason as University Research Chairs, and Professor Nadia Mir and Dr. Bimbadoshka Pukan as Canada Research Chairs. The IFRC is a unique destination for those interested in research centered on Indigenous communities, scholarship, and practice worldwide. Founding members come from, as Jason was just saying, from the Faculty of Fine Arts and also Arts and Sciences, as well as the John Molson School of Business, and diverse disciplines such as applied human behavior, anthropology, art history, design and computational arts, English, geography, planning and the environment, First People Studies, history, studio arts, theater, and management. Our goal is to create a vibrant space where questions of importance to Indigenous peoples can be engaged from multiple perspectives, and where faculty and students can operate within a context of the advanced analysis of Indigenous thought and creation, as Jason was just saying. And in order to do that, you need a critical mass of people. You need a critical mass of thinkers who are all working together in that space, and that's what we are trying to build with the IFRC. We have a really incredible array of faculty right now at the university. I believe that we're up to 18 Indigenous faculty, somewhere up there, which is also something that was called for the Indigenous in the Indigenous Directions Action Plan, and that the university has been very committed towards seeing new hires happening across the university. We've also increased institutional funding for Indigenous graduate research entrance exam scholarships, which helps to bring students into this membership fold with us, and we hope helps us to elevate their research and support their work as they're out doing important work in their communities and internationally. Next slide, please, Hans.
Okay, so I'm looking at this and I'm realizing we've said all this.
Okay, let's skip it.
All right, so just
we're ahead of ourselves. We get too excited.
Just a short repeat, which is is that we're really interested in Indigenous research sovereignty, how we can conduct the research according to the methods and the values that that our communities expect from us. Okay, so location. So as Heather said earlier, we're on the 11th floor of the EV building. We're currently in discussions about maybe doing a redesign so that we can move from the current situation, which is a nice situation, which is where we have kind of one big studio and then 3 smaller spaces, so that we can actually kind of combine those together to create a real center where there's the sense of not just sort of Heather's group and my group, but our students all mingled together, but also the students and the faculty, students who are working with other faculty, and of course, other faculty members coming in and being able to make use of the space.
Yeah, we want it to feel like one unified space that can be divided up when it's necessary, when there's workshops happening or what have you, but then can also be expansive and open up and can involve not just mine and Jason's research, obviously, but everybody's research, and make space for everyone to come and be together and share knowledge and exchange in that way. I don't know if there's anything more to say about the redesign. And then, of course, ultimately, Graham and Ann are going to get us a bright, shiny building somewhere. We're going to work on that together. But that's the longer term plan. This is probably a couple of years in the development to have the renovations of our space done so that we can get to that first phase of the development. But, you know, we have big plans for institution-wide takeover, and we know we're going to have lots of support in that development going forward. Then we were going to talk a little bit about some of the projects that are already getting ready to launch. So of course, this is we're into our first year now, and we've been doing a lot of work just to sort of get the membership together and work on the website and get all the other things ready that you need to do for a launch during a pandemic. But we do have a couple of bigger, more expansive project-wide, research center-wide projects that are starting to develop. So earlier, just a couple of months ago, this book that I have co-edited with Tony Belcourt and Dylan Robinson came out. I have a copy of it here. And so this book came out in print, and it is produced by Canadian Heritage. And I'm just going to read the blurb of what the text for this this co-edited volume is. It's published in in English, French, and all of the languages of the Indigenous peoples who contributed to it. This publication gathers firsthand experiences and perspectives on promoting and protecting the arts, cultural expressions, and artistic practices of Indigenous peoples. The experiences and insights shared here articulate both real-life encounters and challenges with misappropriation of the arts, cultural expressions, and artistic practices, as well as some of the tools and solutions being advanced to address the challenges of things like cultural appropriation. Throughout this publication, we seek to advance a shared understanding of the issues and challenges of cultural misappropriation at the local, regional, national, and international levels. Our hope is that the experiences and stories shared in this publication encourage dialogue and the ongoing development of effective solutions to promote and protect Indigenous arts, cultural expressions, and artistic practices. So this is a book, it's got about 25 authors included in it. It's come out as a text. But what we'd like to do, and what we've been working with Canadian Heritage to advance, is to take the essays that are in this book and to expand this into a digital platform that creates space for Indigenous peoples all across the country to write and submit their own digital feedback to this. This is, 25 essays seems like a lot, but it's actually, they're usually actually short pieces that are really think pieces that come out of very specific cultural groundings. For example, Christy Belcourt writing about her work being used by fashion designers and turning into, working on the collaboration of turning her clothing into something that is tangible, or, a throat singer writing about the protection of intangible cultural heritage. So these are very specific contexts. And so we know, of course, that as this book comes out and the essays are engaged with by readers across the country, there will be more voices that could be included in this text. And so as one of the inaugural projects of the Indigenous Futures Research Centre, we are hoping within the next year to launch a postdoctoral fellowship position in collaboration with Canadian Heritage, where we could have someone, a new post, please tell if you know any people who are about to graduate from their doctorates. This is going to be a position coming up in the next year where we will have the potential to be engaging with, soliciting, and contacting authors who may be able to contribute to this, so that the book takes on a new life online and continues to grow and expand and include more voices. So we're really excited about this project. Right now, it's free, online, open access, downloadable PDFs, and it will be soon. So that's the first phase. But we are working with a graphic designer in order to turn it into a more interactive site. And we really look forward to seeing how this grows and becomes a hub for we think, what are really critical and timely conversations around cultural appropriation. Next slide, please, Hans. Oh,
Okay, so I want to talk about two projects that we're hoping to launch out of the Indigenous Futures Research Centre, following on the project that Heather was just talking about. So one is transmediating Indigenous art. So we applied for funding this fall to pursue this project, which is really looking at, and that's the image on the right, actually, looking at how Indigenous artists can take their work that they've made for the real world and transmediate it into virtual spaces. So we have a gallery in the online world, Second Life, that is called Abtech Gallery. And we've actually been running exhibitions there since the start of the pandemic. It was sort of part of our pivot into the virtual world when everything shut down. And we had this island that we had been using for about a decade now to create various art projects and as a gathering place. And we thought, okay, well, why don't we actually sort of use the gallery that we've created there and open it up to the public and do some shows. And those went so well that we got excited and we thought, okay, let's see if we can keep this going and really use it as a place of research to think through what does it mean for Indigenous cultural practices in general as we sort of move them or expand them into online spaces. What are the protocols? What are the approaches? What happens to the sorts of things that we do as Indigenous people, as Indigenous artists in this world? What happens as we do more of that in virtual space? So hopefully we'll be able to get that launched in the spring of this year from the Research Center. And that involves a number of the other members of the Research Center in that application as well. So I'm super excited about the opportunity to be working with my colleagues on that project. And then the other project I want to mention is called Abundant Intelligences. And this comes out of a research directory called Indigenous Protocol and Artificial Intelligence that got sort of spawned within the the Initiative for Indigenous Futures. And what Abundant Intelligence is looking at is it's sort of asking the question of how do we integrate existing computational practices such as artificial intelligence into Indigenous knowledge systems and develop new computational practices from within Indigenous contexts to support the flourishing of Indigenous communities. So it's really trying to take a look at this incredibly powerful technology that's being developed very rapidly, artificial intelligence, and really kind of look deeply at how we can create AI from Indigenous perspectives, both sort of defensively in the sense that, as people probably know, one of the things that we're finding with the current generation of AI is that it embeds all the biases that we have as human beings. And in fact, it amplifies them in really horrible ways. And so there's, and Indigenous people kind of know this story, right? We've been at the pointy end of the Western technological stick for hundreds of years, often having new technology used against us and tested against us. And this is a way of sort of getting in front of that and saying, okay, wait, we're gonna do the work of trying to make sure that that doesn't happen, but even more proactively, really think about how we can build capacity within our communities so we can build these systems in our way and in ways that fit with our values and are responsive to our priorities. So we're in the middle of applying for 3 grants right now. So again, hopefully maybe sometime in the spring or in the summer, we'll know if this will be able to go forward from the Indigenous Futures Research Center. Okay, next slide.
We're also really excited about the potential to support the innovative research being done by undergraduate and graduate students across the university. We have the really incredible Indian humor programs, which allow our students to navigate across different faculties in order to create projects of their own design. And the IFRC is really looking forward to supporting the innovative proliferation of their research projects on our website. So for students, we really are hoping to, we'll probably be developing something like a fellowship program or other systems of support in order to help students not just to have a place to share their work, but also not just a platform, but a way for us to help them mobilize and get training and develop their ideas so that they can become research leaders in the future. This is a slide from Christine Kilasik-Lucier's project based on her community of Saluit. She is a current master's student who's been working with across oral history and research creation, working with such faculty as myself and Jason and Bimadoshka Pukan. Her thesis project consists of a podcast series on Inuit oral history, wherein she will be working on recording conversations with elders from her community, focusing on kinship relations and genealogy, as well as local histories and personal anecdotes about the beginning of settlement in Saluit. Christine will also be exploring how story work and Indigenous research can guide her conceptualization of her experience as an Inuk academic, and to possibly think of pathways to integrate Inuit traditional knowledge, or Kayumayant Kangit, into colonial systems in Nunavik. And so it's a really exciting project that we are very, very much looking forward to supporting and providing Christine with training across the research center in order to develop this work and to launch this podcast. We're just thrilled and hope and are already working with other students to conceptualize their research and research creation in ways that could be facilitated by the IFRC. Okay, so now we move on to Jason and I are not solo talking heads part of the IFRC launch this afternoon. And we are really, really grateful to our colleagues for joining us to be in dialogue around what the idea of an Indigenous Futures Research Centre means to them. So we're going to say welcome to our colleagues. I think we're going to do a few.
And actually, yeah, we're going to do some introductions real quick. Okay, so joining us today are Dr. Natasha Blanchet-Cohen, who is an associate professor in the Department of Applied Human Sciences at Concordia and graduate director of the Youth Work Diploma. She is co-chair of the Quebec Youth Research Network. As a community-engaged scholar, she focuses on opportunities for community youth development and the provision of rights-based and culturally safe services and programs, particularly as it relates to education.
Professor Hannah Klaus is an assistant professor in frameworks and interventions of Indigenous art practice in the studio art department at Concordia University. She is a transdisciplinary artist of Gayankahaga and English heritage, whose practice-based research engages with the idea of space shaped by language, material culture, and place as transversal living concepts. Hannah is the co-director of the Post-Image Cluster at the Milieu Center and is one of the co-founders of Daphne, a new Indigenous contemporary art center based here in Jojagi, which is like the most exciting news of last year.
We'll also be joined by Professor Mark Igloliorti, who is an interdisciplinary artist of Inuit ancestry from Nunatsiavut, Labrador, who began his teaching career at Emily Carr Art and Design University and is now an associate professor in studio arts. His artistic work is primarily painting and drawing. In 2017, Igloliorti received a Reveal Indigenous Art Award from the Hanachin Foundation. How do you say that, Heather?
Petition.
Thank you. And to note, he was also longlisted for a Sobe Art Award in 2012. Earlier this year, the 2021 work Pingiak, or Outspoken, was acquired by the Bank of Montreal collection.
And I'm thrilled to share that Dr. Michelle McGow is an assistant professor in the Department of Art History now at Concordia University, making us two Indigenous professors in the same department, which I feel like is groundbreaking, but I don't know for sure. Like, very exciting to me. Her research focuses on reconstructing knowledge around gender and sexuality through an Indigenous worldview. She also focuses on Indigenous queer identities in the arts, the resurgence of the Two-Spirit movement, and bringing historical traditional knowledge into the present. So welcome, everyone. Cameras on. I don't know if we have a way to pin a group of people, but perhaps as we're speaking, it'll become easier. At least we've got cameras on. I see everybody. Hi, everyone. Welcome. So nice to see you all. We had some questions that we thought might be of interest to get started. I'll just do a rundown and then we can start wherever we like. What is Indigenous Futures? What is Indigenous Futures Research? And why is it important? How does your research relate to Indigenous futures? Who and what does your work impact? And what does it mean for you, other faculty, and other students to now have the IFRC? We want to talk about, what we want to accomplish together. And I think a great place to start is, what is it that we do? Who wants to go first? Jason, I've been.
Oh, listen, I'll just jump in and say, I think you and Jason have done an excellent job of talking about Indigenous futures and what it is.
Fair.
I guess if I sort of add to that, it would just be to reinforce what you've been talking about. I think Indigenous Futures Research is all research happening now that is led by Indigenous researchers that affects Indigenous communities or involves Indigenous issues and ideas, and I think that what you've been showing us and talking about has been beautiful examples of these.
Thanks, Hannah.
I could jump in now in terms of thinking about like my own research and in particular thinking about the future and specifically making things or making places for everyone. And I think that is one of my major focuses of my research because I'm working with gender and sexuality. And I think it's really important that, we bring forward, things from the past and I think Leanne Simpson, talks about the things that we had to lay down and picking these things up again and bringing them into, a contemporary context, but also a much, broader context of looking into the future and creating the kinds of worlds that we want to create. So that's to me in terms of thinking about like my own research and the contributions that I hope that it will bring for future generations. And I also think it's also a place of imagining and having the freedom to imagine. And I see that is something that the Research Center will enable us to do is bringing, like-minded people together and to start thinking about what are the types of things that we want to see in our future? What are the things that we want to bring forward? What are the things that we want to emphasize? And so I think it's in some ways, creating this space for us to think about how can we be the best that we are capable of being?
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Hannah, for getting us started. Natasha and Mark, I'd love to hear what you are working on now and how it relates to a framework of Indigenous research.
Okay, I see that I'm unmuted and Natasha still is, so
that's a prompt.
She's allowing me the space to go ahead. So thank you, Natasha and Heather and Jason for the questions. I like the framing of Indigenous futures because it's looking forward. It's not thinking about Indigenous people in a static way or in a way where our culture is threatened or going away or anything like that. It's much more about thinking about how we're going to be going forward, like grounded in tradition and communities, but maybe practices, Indigenous practices as a living and changing thing. And certainly valuing Indigenous perspectives for what they are, rather than having to mold them into a different kind of framework. So those are some of the broad ways that I see Indigenous futures being important to our research.
Hi. So maybe I'll just add on to that. First of all, I really want to congratulate Jason and Heather for your leadership. It was actually really interesting for me to just hear the presentation and be updated on what is actually, I had to remind myself, if you the vision has evolved and developed. I just want to come and state that I'm coming here as an ally and as a non-Indigenous person who's been involved in community collaborative work for the last 25 years or so. And so I think for me to have this Indigenous Futures Centre is like, yeah, I'm proud to be a part of Concordia. I think within the Quebec context also, I think we are really setting forth our voice and leadership. I work as the co-chair for the Youth Research Chair, the Indigenous Stream, and that was the perspective that I put forward, is that from all the universities in Quebec, we had the most Indigenous faculty, but now I'm really happy to see how many more Indigenous faculty we have. I think the two pieces that really speak to the research and the perspectives that we're trying to put forward at the Youth Research Chair, which represents 20 faculty from other universities in Quebec, is really the idea of the community-led and community collaborative aspect, because that guides all of the work that we do. And I think also the alternative methodologies that are being put forward through the Futures Centre is really in line with the work that we've been doing with youth Indigenous youth across Quebec. And also, I think just the piece around the bridging, I think bridging across communities in Quebec and also across languages. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Natasha. Thank you, Mark. I think that something that I think Mark and Michelle and maybe everyone also kind of touched on was this idea of like, that doing Indigenous futures doesn't mean moving in one direction, but actually means reflecting back on the past, but with an eye to what that research does for the future generations and for the future work. And so I think that I was just reading the other day about some, I think, Maori philosophy around the phrase walking backwards into the future. So like having an eye on where you're coming from and being responsible to those who came before you and also future generations of those who are going to come. I think it's something that we can really pull into what we're doing here as we're thinking about how we go about this work.
So I was wondering if people wanted to talk a bit about who they see their work impacting in terms of the research and the creation that they make. Does anybody want to start with that? I gotta call on people. Oh, go Hannah, go.
Yeah, I unmuted. Yeah, I think, well, I hope what we do, I hope what I do, I create, I work primarily in installation. I think that the work ends up impacting Indigenous communities as well as individuals, both in the making when it's collaborative working with communities, but also the fact that Indigenous visitors to galleries, Indigenous people then see themselves reflected in these spaces, their ideas and thoughts in these spaces. When I was an artist in residence at the McCord, I remember guides that were actually former students of mine, Indigenous students of mine that were sort of guides that were there, and they would just be so excited to see this work in the space and want to bring their tour groups of students through to start off there in this space and go on through the museum. So I think it's just a way of having Indigenous thought and knowledge available through different means to be communicated and be received. That really is what motivates me and is important.
Great, thank you. It also makes me think, that part of that work is with your students too, right? Sort of in terms of coming into a space and seeing Indigenous people represented in front of you in the classroom, right? So, okay, I'm going to go to Michelle.
Thank you. I keep on thinking, I'm thinking, you know, basically so much of what I do is like just creating space and holding space. And like, you know, mentioned before, you know, being Métis, being queer, hoping that my students, you know, see that as, you know, as not as an example, but as possibility, you know, and for, you know, different kinds of knowledges to be celebrated within academia, within our communities. And so I think I've been at this for a while, although just kind of coming into academia, but I've always seen it of what I do as kind of creating a space, opening up space, hoping that, you know, because I don't have, it's not only my story, there are many other stories out there. So, you know, how do we value that? How do we show that we value that? And how do we bring this into places like, you know, the university, places like the museum, places like the archive. And so I think in terms of how I see, you know, my research functioning is, and just even myself being in the institution is, again, you know, creating space. I know I'm a big person. Yeah.
I think what's really remarkable, Michelle, is how very quickly a group of students have become aware of your work and have sort of started to form a collectivity around this. And I think it really speaks to the deep need in the community for these kinds of spaces, like places for the exploration of pre-colonial identity and gender expression. And I think it's such a fascinating and important and critical new area, not new area, but like area of like burgeoning research where we're going to be able to explore more and more and get back to all those things that colonialism tried to take away. And I think that, you know, if not here, then where? You know, it's an amazing time to be at the institution. I'm so grateful to have you as a colleague and leading this and working with so many just amazing graduate students and undergraduate students. You can see already how it really does play into recruitment at the institution, but also like supporting those students while they're here.
Exactly. And I think that
sorry, go ahead.
I am so sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I just think, you know, it's the time. It's, you know, very much, you know, that all these things had to come, you know, take place and create this space for this knowledge to start to come forward. And I think that we are right now riding kind of on this crest. And so I'm hoping that it will propel us well into the future and beyond.
Mark, you were nodding while you were talking. It looked like you wanted to jump in.
Oh, yeah. I have a confession, which is I had my video off because I was taking the train home and I had some soup just before I turned my video on. So I'm very aware that people might be hungry and need to get to dinner. But as a visual artist, I have a really hard time speaking generally about my work. I was wondering if I could share a screen to show a portion of a video, like less than a minute, just to talk about this idea of who my work is for.
Yeah, I think Anna can make you a co-host in a moment.
Okay, and I realize I'm asking for maybe a little bit extra, but I think it'll be worth your while in terms of the discussion. Okay, so you can see and hear me?
Nope, we can't see or hear. We can't see the screen. I can't.
Okay. So this is a video that I collaborated with my wife on, and I'm starting it at the beginning. Well, I'll just, if you can see this little thumbnail, this is the Vancouver Harbor.
Mark, you have to share your
Mark,
screen.
we can't see anything.
You have to
Oh,
press
no?
share your screen.
Oh, sorry. I'm on my iPad and I thought I did share screen.
Like first Zoom?
Oh, wait. Oh no, I didn't do the start broadcast.
Mark's my brother, everyone. If you can't tell.
There we go.
Technical siblings. Okay, so here we go again. So like I said, this is a video that I collaborated with my wife and filmed in the harbor in Vancouver. And I'm sorry, I'll play kind of in the middle just for the sake of time.
Yeah, make it full screen.
Good?
Good.
Thank you for allowing me to put that on. I skipped there for a bit, but when Jason put the question to me of who is my art for, I have to say initially it's for myself. Like I want to have experiences where I get to connect with both my ancestry, but also think about the future of things like the kayak. It's really astounding how many people are surprised when you mention that a kayak is an Inuit vessel form and design. And so to take possession of that form and that maneuver, to relearn it myself after perhaps a few generations have gone without being able to do it, and to put it into a video piece, for me, it was really significant. So I think though as well, like there's a aspect where I'm looking to change the perceptions of everyone in terms of what the kayak is, that and thinking about its Inuit origins. And I think that in some ways it can also, in some of my other works, lend to other respective Indigenous practices where I make assertions about the kayak being a hunting boat, and that a hunting practice is a beautiful part of Indigenous cultures. And of course, I think about other Inuit and future generations and their involvement with other vehicles and pieces of culture, and how they might take possession of that for themselves. So, and then finally, I think about my students, and in learning something like this, it starts off with the failures and the repetition, and then finally the success. And in my teaching, I try and keep that forward with my students, that the striving and the failures are a part of the success, and there's something to be embraced. So with my practice, I try and think about myself, the wider community, my Inuit community, and my students. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mark, and thanks for sharing that. Thanks for sharing that with us. It was good to see some live art in this conversation. And I think we're gonna see if Natasha wants to answer that question about who and what your work impacts. And then we're gonna open up a Q&A for the audience. And we would like it if the panelists could stay with us with their camera on, if they're comfortable doing that for the Q&A. So Natasha?
Yeah, maybe I'll just pick up on Michelle's point around creating a space. my Kalabit name for my husband is Minangolun, and I really see my role. It means upholding, uplifting. And I was just thinking about my day today in terms of impact, whether it's supporting youth in the community and participating in research, writing articles, working with organizations. Like right now, we're working with the youth portion of the AFN, Réseau de la Paix, and looking at doing some research with them around the youth voice and how are youth currently engaged in the Quebec system, and working with the Institut Chakapèche around education, how we can inform policy around Indigenous youth's experience in the urban area, and how our research, we can do collaborative research with them. So those are kind of the different levels. And I might just use this plug as an example of impact. We are hosting a podcast with the team members from the Youth Research Chairs, so the youth coordinator, Véronique Picard, around some work that they've been doing. So it was a research that emerged from their needs around language. It will be hosted by Force Space. And this is the type of example of an event that would be great, that would benefit a lot from the partnership with the with IFRC in terms of promoting this type of event, because right now there's very few Concordia students who attend, and all of these events are translated or bilingual. So we would really love to have people coming. There are, every month we organize a midi causerie, sort of a lunch bag on different themes that emerge from our partners. The one at the end of the month, you can't see it really well, but it's around healing. It's all around youth issues, but Indigenous youth healing perspectives. Both of these events, there's a number of Concordia students that you might recognize the names. So hopefully some of you can attend. And that is the impact that I see is really in creating these types of conversation spaces and supporting the future, la relève. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natasha. I'm just looking at there's a couple of questions and comments that are starting to come into the chat, and we are welcoming you all to join us to talk about these things, like all of our colleagues here have been talking about, and anything that you're interested in discussing. One of the questions in the chat is asking from Annie Murdoch, and asking, how do we see the IFRC position as a platform or a center to build partnerships with other universities locally and internationally? And it's funny that you should ask that, because on Sunday I'm flying out. Jason will be joining virtually, but we are actually joining with other Indigenous-led university-based research labs across the country. We're going to have a conversation around what the future might hold for a network of Indigenous-led research labs across the country. So the Banff Centre for the Arts is hosting a intensive workshop all next week on this very topic. So I guess we'll have to keep you tuned on where those conversations go, led by Jason and our colleague, Dr. Julie Nagum, who I see is on the call here. So we're very much looking forward to that. It is a good question.
Yeah, and I think,
go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I also think, one of the things that we've been doing in grants around this term international, right, is really emphasizing internationally from an Indigenous perspective. Right, so that's Mohawk and Kanaka Maoli, or Inuit and Maori, right? Really sort of trying to think of internationally from that perspective, and as well as sort of like kind of the nation state geographic perspective, because that still does matter in lots of different ways. But I think for instance, the Abundant Intelligences grant is going to be a very large scale international grant. Or sort of project that's moving both internationally in the Indigenous sense across a number of different communities, but then also geographically across North America, the Pacific, Australia, and New Zealand. And so for me, I think one of the things the Research Center does is it provides a really clear anchor at Concordia for people who want to engage in those, both national and international collaborations. It's very clear that we have resources. We're in Milieu, which has an amazing set of research creation tools that we can use in those collaborations. So it really, I think, makes it it makes it more real in a certain sense. And, you know, as an individual researcher, I can already say that it helps to be able to say it's not just me and my research group, but it's actually being, you know, co-hosted by the Indigenous Futures Research Centre. So we're hoping that that'll help other faculty when they want to do these sorts of collaborations, you know, across the country and across Indigenous nations.
Victoria in the chat is just thanking Mark for sharing his experience of reclaiming the kayak practice, saying that that was really moving. Thank you, Victoria. Victoria, as you may or may not know, was the first coordinator of the Indigenous Futures Research Centre and previously worked with us on the Indigenous Directions Leadership Group, and is now a grad student. So it's nice to see you back again, Victoria. I don't know if anyone else has questions.
Victoria was really, I just want to say Victoria was really critical in the first phase of pulling together the research center. And we're very thankful for all the work that she did. And sorry that we weren't able to launch this under her watch still. She had to sort of do all this work and then, you know, go off to do her graduate work, which we're super happy about. And we're happy that she joined us today. So yeah, any other questions from the audience or the panelists?
You can raise your hand or you can jump in, or we can, or that is also a great place to segue into the last part of the presentation, was just the acknowledgements and thanks of everyone who has participated in bringing this to where we are already.
Yeah, so what's that?
I said, let's do it.
Let's do it. Okay, so we're going to start off by thanking Skawanati for welcoming us into the space today.
We want to thank President Carr, Provost Whitelaw, and VPRGS Director Provost Pollard Adams.
Philip Jacques and the entire Office of Research.
Bart Simon and our colleagues at the Milieu Institute for Art, Culture, and Technology, who have just been so incredibly welcoming and supportive of all of the iterations of Indigenous research happening in and through Milieu.
The network of scholars, students, and staff that developed the action plan that created the framework for getting this off the ground.
Our incredible colleague, Genevieve Sui, and the entire Office of Community Engagement, who have been alongside this project throughout and continue to be developing new partnerships with us.
Our current research coordinator, Hans Lujan, who is the person who made all of this go, brought everything together. And of course, Victoria Cook, our former research coordinator, who got everything sort of off the ground for us.
The Initiative for Indigenous Futures Research Associate, Una Regina, who made our beautiful logo design and very patiently worked through many iterations while a group of people from the research center made up their minds about the exact perfect font for this new logo for us.
Our steering and advisory committees at the research center, and of course our entire membership for, you know, contributing so much of their time and their good minds in the sort of kind of 2 years of consultations and conversations that we undertook in order to formulate the proposal for the research center, and then also being with us as we transition from a cluster into the research center, and always coming with, you know, a ton of enthusiasm and really great ideas.
And then finally, of course, all of the past, current, and future partners to this organization and to this new research center, all the members who came and shared with us today. Thank you all to the 4 members from the group during this very busy time of year to come and share your thoughts and ideas with us. A very special thanks to the Fourth Space team for hosting us. Thank you, Anna, and all of you for joining us here today. So please watch our website for upcoming events. We'll have other launches. Hopefully, you'll all be able to come and see us in the spaces in the near-ish future. We're just so glad that everyone came and helped us celebrate this and to launch it officially. We hope to engage with you all going forward. Nakami.
Mahalo nui, everybody.
Bye, Ma.
Oh,
Wonderful, and thank you, Heather, Jason, and Hans behind the scenes for bringing this to us. We look forward to continued collaborations with the IFRC here in Fourth Space. You're all welcome in next time. We hope to see you in person. Thanks, everybody. As a reminder, we have streamed this to YouTube. If you'd like to revisit any part of it, it's up there now. So check us out, Concordia University Fourth Space, and you'll find this as the first video there. On that note, I guess it's time to eat, right, Mark?
Now I want soup.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Have a great evening. We're going to
good night.
go ahead and
Bye,
close
everybody.
up.
well done.
Thank you.